Good evening, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. And Shabbat Shalom to those online as well. It's great to see such a nice turnout here in our room and also online. Tonight's service is going to be exploring a Jewish New Year you might have never heard of before. It's called the New Year for Animals. It actually happened yesterday in the traditional counting, although, as we'll see, the traditional counting might also count it for next month. But we'll see about that debate there. We'll also find out the answer to the eternal question, is Judaism a dog culture or a cat culture? There's more to find out about that. And so I thought as a setup lead-in to this discussion of the Jewish New Year for animals, our Shabbat service on nature would be a useful approach to set the tone for the discussion. So you have your services with you, or for those online, on the screen. And as we often do, we start our service with a way of connecting to each other through song. And the singing is more important than the words, because bim bam doesn't mean anything, except the fact that singing together means something to us. And then the second part of the song, Shabbat Shalom, is wishing each other a peaceful end of the week and a time of stopping and reflection. So as you feel comfortable, please join me in bim bam. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat 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 Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat 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 Shalom, Shabbat 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 Shalom, Shabbat 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 Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat 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 Shalom. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Hum. This next poem, Shabbat Moment by Marge Piercy, is one we often use to set the tone for a Shabbat service. But notice as I go through this poem this time, the connections to nature, the imagery of nature, the use of nature as an entree to a moment of silent reflection. At the conclusion of reading the poem, I'll simply pause for a moment of silence, and you can reflect. If you'd like to close your eyes, you're welcome to, or simply be able to breathe together. Shabbat Moment. A scarf trailing over the lilac sunset, fair weather clouds, cirrus uncinus, silk chiffon. Twilight softens the air, whispering, "Come, lie down with me." Untie the knots of the will, loosen your clenched grip, barren hills of bone. Here, no edges to hone, only the palm fallen open as a rose about to toss its petals. What you have made, what you have spoiled, let go. Let twilight empty the crowded rooms, quiet the jostling colors to hues of swirling water, pearls of fog. This is the time for letting it go, like a released balloon dwindling. Tilt your neck and let your face open to the sky, like a pond catching light, drinking the darkness. Every time I stop for 20 seconds to be quiet, I think, why don't I do this more often? It's good for me. Well, the next stage of our Shabbat service is, of course, lighting Shabbat candles. The light connects us to the experience of light in the natural world, but also the fact that as human beings, we've learned to not only rely on natural light, but be able to make our own light. And to light our Shabbat candles this evening, I'd like to invite the motivating force behind the Science Fiction Book Club. On behalf of the Science Fiction Book Club, which is hosting our Oneg Shabbat, David Hirsch to come forward as we sing Baruch HaOr, Let Us Light These Lights. What better symbol of our connection to the natural world than consuming the produce of that natural world? But of course, we don't simply just take the grape as we find it in the wild, because who knows which ones are poisonous. Instead, we cultivate the ones we know taste the best. We crossbreed and create a vintage that will taste even better. We grow it in the best sun and soil. We water it with care, and then we harvest, and then we press that fruit into juice, and then we wait, and we wait for it to get better through the power of invention that learned to wait to make it sweeter and more rich and more meaningful to us. And so it's human beings that take what we find in the world and make it better. Wine is a marvelous symbol for that. So this evening I'll sing our Kiddush blessing in Hebrew, and then we can say the English all together. Savri Maranan Rabbanan De'et Mo Kidashnu et hayayin, Savri Maranan Rabbanan Dehayom, Baruchim Haborim Pri Agafen, HaShabbat Mesamchenu, HaShabbat Merapenu, Legufotenu, Lenafshotenu, HaShabbat Meashrenu, Baruchim Hashomrim et Yom HaShabbat. In English together. Rabbis and sages of old proclaim, we sanctify this wine. Rabbis and sages of today proclaim, blessed is the fruit of the vine. Shabbat makes us joyful. Shabbat heals us in body and in spirit. Shabbat enriches us. Blessed are those who keep the Shabbat. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. I love Chianti. People give meaning to the universe. If we call to the stars and say, tell us the purpose of life, the stars are silent. If we caress the earth and ask, what shall we do? The earth gives no reply. If we pursue the wind and plead, let us know the path we must follow, the wind has no answer. The universe, with all its complexity, is dumb. It can neither be born nor die. People give meaning to the universe. The commands of the gods are only the echoes of our own striving. Although we are part of the world, we are different from all other worldly things. We can hear and speak. We can love and hate. We can choose and deny. Out of our needs arises desire, and out of desire arises our passion for life. We are not told to be happy. We simply want to be. 2 poems on the limits and the possibilities of connecting Judaism with nature. The Israeli Navy. The Israeli Navy, sailing to the end of the world, stocked with grain and books black with God's verse, turned back rather than sail on the Sabbath. 6 days, was the consensus, was enough for anyone. So the world, it was concluded, was 3 days wide in each direction, allowing 3 days back. And Saturdays were given over to keeping close, while Sundays, the Navy, all decked out in white and many-colored skullcaps, would sail furiously, trying to go off the deep end. Yo-ho-ho, would say the sailors for 6 days, while on the shores their women moaned. For years their boats were slow and all show, and they turned into families on the only land they knew. The moon is teaching Bible. The moon is teaching Bible. Cyclamen, poppy, and mountain listen with joy. Only the girl cries. The poppy can't hear her crying. The poppy is blazing in Torah, burning like the verse. The cyclamen doesn't listen to the crying. The cyclamen swoons from the sweet secrets. The mountain won't hear her crying. The mountain is sunk in thought. But here comes the wind, soft and fragrant, to honor, hope, and sing. Each heart is a flying horseman, an ardent hunter, swept to the ends of the sea. Our next song is new to some people. Sometimes our Sunday school has used it for dancing or for activities on Sukkot. So we're going to do our best and sing Ushavte Mayim. Ready?
Nice opening. ושאבתם מים בששון ממעייני ישוע, ושאבתם מים בששון ממעייני ישוע, מים, 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 היי מים בששון, מים, 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 היי מים בששון, היי, 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 מים, 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 מים בששון, מים, 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 מים בששון, ושאבתם מים בששון ממעייני ישוע, ושאבתם מים בששון ממעייני ישוע.
2 poems on the power and possibility of connections to nature. The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water and feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. I really don't know why it is that all of us are so committed to the sea, except I think it's because, in addition to the fact that the sea changes, and the light changes, and ships change, it's because we all came from the sea. And it is an interesting biological fact that all of us have, in our veins, the exact same percentage of salt in our blood that exists in the ocean. And therefore, we have salt in our blood, in our sweat, in our tears. We are tied to the ocean. And when we go back to the sea, whether it is to sail or to watch it, we are going back from whence we came. My hereafter. Do not come when I am dead to sit beside a low green mound, or bring the first gay daffodils because you love me so, for I shall not be there. You cannot find me there. I will look up at you from the eyes of little children. I will bend to meet you in the swaying boughs of bud-thrilled trees and caress you with the passionate sweep of storm-filled winds. I will give you strength in your upward tread of everlasting hills. I will cool your tired body in the flow of the limpid river. I will warm your work-glorified hands through the glow of winter fire. I will soothe you into forgetfulness to the drop, drop of the rain on the roof. I will speak to you out of the rhymes of the masters. I will dance with you in the lilt of the violin and make your heart leap with the bursting cadence of the organ. I will flood your soul with the flaming radiance of the sunrise and bring you peace in the tender rose and gold of the after sunset. All of these have made me happy that are part of me. I shall become part of them. If you're comfortable standing, could I ask you to stand for just a moment? Each Shabbat that we gather, we pause for a moment of reflection and memory to consider those whom we loved who are no longer a living part of our life, but who remain part of the people that we are as they were crucial to the people that we became. And so I invite us all to think and reflect on those loved faces and names who are still connected to us through our loving memory. Invite us to pause for a moment of silent tribute. In the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Proverbs, we read, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the memory of a good person is a blessing to us. Please be seated as we hear a song of love. Are the Jews historically cat people or dog people? Well, there's a clue to be found in the Hebrew language and its evolution. One of the short video format presenters that I enjoy is a man named Elul Gilad. I actually had the chance to interview him for the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, and we share a love of etymology and where this word came from and how it evolved, and he's actually writing a popular dictionary of the Hebrew language. Sometimes it's the modern Hebrew terms, who invented it and which newspaper article did it show up. But in this case, he did a short piece on the words for dog and cat in the Hebrew language. It turns out the word dog appears 30 times in the Hebrew Bible, and no cats. The Semitic word for dog is the same in all the Semitic languages because dogs were ubiquitous, widespread in what's called the Levant. Think of Iraq all the way through the current territory of Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria. In that whole area, there were dogs going back a long time, even before the languages split off from each other. So in Arabic, it's kalb. In Hebrew, it's kelev. It has that same k, l, or b at the end of it. And so it's ubiquitous in the Middle East, in that part of the Middle East. However, cat, they're all different. They use different words. So in modern Hebrew, it's chatul. In Aramaic, it's shunra. If you ever learned the old Chad Gad Yah song, about one little goat and then the cat ate the goat, the ata shunra, here comes the shunra, the cat, but it has nothing to do with chatul. It's a totally different word because Aramaic and Hebrew had already split by the time the cat made it into popular culture there. Now the cat does go back as a pet in Egypt quite a long ways. In, I think, 3700 BCE, we have records of cats. We've got mummified cats. It's not until around the year 2000, during the Roman period, that, I'm sorry, the year zero, 2,000 years ago, rather. And it wasn't until the year zero, about 2,000 years ago, during the Roman period, that the cat began to migrate from Egypt into the rest of the Middle East. Now, the word chatul only appears in rabbinic literature in the 3rd century. Now, this is no judgment on you if you happen to be a dog person or a cat person. In fact, some people think dogs aren't Jewish because of a history of fear of dogs because they were used by the military in Europe and they were a source of oppression during the Holocaust. I've even heard the use of dogs and cats used to describe types of rabbis. That you could be a dog rabbi or a cat rabbi. A dog rabbi is very friendly and comes up and says hello and is happy to meet everybody. Where a cat rabbi is a little more sedate and reserved and you have to get to know them, and the cat rabbis might be smarter, but the dog rabbis might be more successful because they're out there being friendly and they're greeting everyone when they show up. There's actually an essay on this by Dan Cohn-Scherbeck, if you're curious to look up dog rabbis and cat rabbis. Now, just as there are different kinds of rabbis, there are different Jewish New Years. There are actually 4 Jewish New Years, according to the Mishnah, the first collection of rabbinic teachings. Now, in our own lives, we have many New Years that we experience. For example, you have your personal New Year. It's called a birthday. You have a couple's New Year. That's called an anniversary. You have the school New Year, which for parents is wonderful, and for kids, perhaps less so. I remember once seeing a commercial by Staples, I think it was, where kids are walking along very downtrodden through the aisles of the store, and the parents are laughing and jumping around, and the music playing is, "It's the most wonderful time of the," it's the back to school sale. And the parents love it and the kids, but it's an anniversary, it's a new year of sorts. Well, in Jewish life, we had these 4 New Years described in the Mishnah, in the section called Rosh Hashana. And I want to share with you this section, you've got it on your screen, to see what the 4 New Years are all about. There are 4 days in the year that serve as the New Year, each for a different purpose. On the first day of Nisan, which is in the spring, is the New Year for kings. That's when you count a king's rule. It always starts from that one day. Not the date they take power, but there's sort of a universal anniversary. It's analogous to horses today. Every horse's birthday is January 1st. You simply track them by the calendar year in which they were born. They have to keep track of every horse to know when their exact birthday was. So the New Year for Kings is the first day of Nisan. It's also the first day of Nisan is the New Year for the festivals. If you read the Torah in Leviticus 19, it describes a calendar where the first day of the year is the first of Nisan, leading into Passover. Of course, the Jewish New Year today is not in the spring, but in the calendar in Leviticus it is. So they had to kind of square that circle, so maybe it's the backup New Year, or it's the New Year for counting the holidays, because that's how they're listed in Leviticus. And then here's our key one. On the first day of Elul, which was yesterday, is the new year for animal tithes. All the animals born prior to that date belong to the previous year's tithe and are tithed as a single unit, but those born after that date belong to the next year. Basically, you take a census of your flock, and then you decide your tithe, your mandatory sacrifice, as of this date. This is the cutoff date. This is your assessment, your census. The first day of Elul. It's the month just before what is today the Jewish New Year. It's 1 month before Rosh Hashana. However, there's some disagreement, because Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon say the first year for animal tithes should be the 1st of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashana, which is the general Jewish New Year. So they would lump them together. To give you one more thing to do, for the Jewish New Year, you also have to count all your animals. But on the 1st of Tishrei, that is what we today call Rosh Hashana, that is the new year for counting years. You've got a Jewish New Year, you've got Jewish years, you've got to have a time to flip the calendar. Well, this is it, the first day of Tishrei. It's also the first day of a new year for calculating the sabbatical and the Jubilee years, the idea that every 7 years you leave the land fallow, and on the 50th year you release all the debts and the slaves, at least the Jewish slaves. All of that is calculated based on the 1st of Tishrei. And you also use that for tithing vegetables, because when you pick vegetables before that date, it's not going to count as after that date, and so on and so on. And then finally, on the first day of Shabbat is the new year for trees. When you're counting, is this tree 1 year old or 2 years old or 3 years old for sacrifices, you need a new year for that. That's the first day of Shabbat, or, as the House of Hillel says, Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shabbat. That should be the new year for trees. And if you went to Sunday school from the 1990s forward, you know all about Tu B'Shvat. If you went to Sunday school before then, a little bit less so. And we'll talk about why. So those are your 4 Jewish New Years. And we're just experiencing now this Jewish New Year for animals. Now, why is this on the radar now, and you never heard about the Jewish New Year for animals before? Well, it's because it's been reclaimed. Jewish animal rights activists, vegans and vegetarians, or just anti-cruelty activists have decided to use this observance of a new year for animals as an opportunity for activism, awareness, ceremonial work. Just like Tu B'Shvat. Why is Tu B'Shvat known today? Because of environmentalism. Particularly the revival of Earth Day in the 1990s led to Tu B'Shvat Seders being reborn and Tu B'Shvat communal activism being reborn. It was sometimes used by the Zionist movement to plant trees in Israel, even before that, and Israel used it as an environmental holiday going back to the 70s and 80s. But in North American Judaism, Tu B'Shvat was reborn as the New Year for trees only in the last 30 years or so. And so too for the Jewish New Year for animals. So what I want to start exploring with you is whether Judaism is good for animals or bad for animals. And there's going to be arguments on both sides, no matter what we look at. So just maybe brainstorming, what are examples you can think of where Judaism does things that are good for animals? The kosher laws, how is that good for the animals? It would make you eat less meat because it's harder to get the right kind of kosher meat. It won't feel better for the animal that falls in your orbit, right? You're still eating them. His wife says that's all baloney. Okay. Any other thoughts of what might be good for animals in Jewish life, Jewish culture? Who gets to rest on Shabbat? Everybody, even the animals. Right? Even your animals are explicitly listed as they get to rest. Oh, the women aren't. But, but the animals are allowed, and your servants are allowed to rest. It doesn't say your wife explicitly in the resting. Anything else? Well, we'll explore some more. What are some things that might be bad for the animals in Jewish life and culture? Animal sacrifices, okay. Yeah. Chicken soup. Every time we get sick, a chicken has to die. Okay. Anything else? Have you heard of a ritual called kaporos or kaparot? this is an Orthodox ritual where you transfer your sins onto a chicken, preferably a white chicken, for whatever reason, and then you slaughter it, and then you swing it over your head as a way to collect your sins. Again, that's right. You swing it when it's alive, and then you kill it. Yeah. Well, there's a reason why you don't do that with goats or cattle, right? It wouldn't work. But, well, you can't use cats because you couldn't sacrifice cats. They weren't kosher. So, okay, we've got sacrifices, we've got atonement, we've got the fact that you're eating animals, from an animal rights perspective. For some people, eating any kind of animal, no matter how it's slaughtered, would be a problem. Well, all right, let's look at some examples then from Jewish literature and law about how we've treated animals. And we can go back to the very beginning with the creation of animals themselves. Remember, in a creationist perspective, we go back to Genesis 1 to find out how it all started. So, on day 5, we have the beginning of the creation of animals. After the lights and the water and the land. Now on day 5, God says, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." So you've got fish and you've got birds as the first animals created. God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and the winged birds of every kind. And God says, that's good. These animals are good. He blessed them and said, "Be fertile and increase." Literally, be fruitful. Pre is fruit. It's be fruitful and multiply. "Fill the waters and the seas, let the birds increase on the earth." So they get to multiply, they get to spread. Evening and morning, a 5th day. And on the 6th day, let the earth bring forth all living kind of cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind. So notice it makes a difference between the behemah, which is the domesticated animal, like cattle, and the chaya, the wild animal. You might have heard, if you had any relatives that spoke Yiddish, the word wilde chaya. If you were a wilde chaya, what was that? Anyone remember? Like a wild animal, right? You were a wild animal. And a behemah was just a sort of cattle, settled animal. That could also be an insult in its own way. But that was a distinction that the rabbis also would make between the domesticated animals and the wild animals out there in the world. But these are now created also. God made wild beasts of every kind and cattle of every kind and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And that was good. And then here we get the pinnacle of creation according to Genesis chapter 1. God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth." So now we have one kind of creation, or creature, if you want to say it, that is above, that is in charge, that is different from all the others. And God created humankind in the divine image, in the image of God, male and female. He blessed them, and God said, "Be fruitful and increase." Pru uravu, again, the same thing as he said to the fish. "Fill the earth and master it." So not just fill it, but rule it, be in charge. "Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the living things that creep on the earth. See, I give to you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they will be your food. And to all the animals on land, and all the birds of the sky, and everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food." So what are people allowed to eat in the Garden of Eden? Vegetables and fruits, but not animals. They're not listed there as what's for yours for food. And the animals eat all the grass. Now, what the lions thought about having to eat grass, we don't know. But the premise is that everything is vegetarian, because, of course, there's no death in the world. What about fish? Fish don't count. Well, because fish eat other fish, and who knows what happened. The fish are under the water. You see, this is written from the perspective of the hill country. And who knows what goes on under the water? Like, that's a black box. We don't know. Now, God saw all that had been made and found it not just good. With humanity in charge, it is very good. That is the pinnacle of creation. Not just good, but very good. So then everything is made, and God takes a break. That's the beginning of Shabbat, the beginning of chapter 2. Now, in chapter 2, verse 4, it depends on your perspective. From a religious perspective, it now rewinds the tape to a little bit earlier, and we get more detail. From a historical perspective, it's a different version of the creation story. The God name is different, the order of creation is different, where in the first one we had the land and then plants and animals, and in this case we get human beings first and then the animal. The order is somewhat messed up. But in chapter 2, we now get another story of the creation of people. When no grass or shrub is on the earth, then the waters spread. He creates a human being from the ground, breathes the breath of life into him, plants a garden and puts the human being there in the garden, and then causes every tree to grow. So the order is different. We've got people, now trees are growing, but there's no animals yet. And of course, the tree is good for food. And good to look at too, it says. The river comes out and waters the ground, and then God says, it's not good for the human being to be alone. I will make a fitting counterpart for him. And now God forms out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky and brings them to the human being to see what he would call them. And whatever he calls them, that's its name. So now again, the human being is in charge, right? He's the one naming all the animals. But the purpose of the creation of the animals is given as to be companions. Again, not for food, but to try to keep him company, because it's not good for him to be alone. And yet, even though he put names on all the animals, there was no fitting counterpart to the man that was found. And so God puts a sleep upon the human being and takes one of his sides or his ribs, depending on your reading, and then he fashions that side from the man, from the ish, into an isha, into a woman. And he brings her to the man, and to the man he says, this one is bone of your bone, or actually the man himself says, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. I will call her isha, woman, because from ish, from man, she was taken. So the companionship of the animals was okay, but not perfect. And then of course we know, once you have man and woman together, everything falls apart. Due to an animal, right? The snake in the garden tricks them into eating from the tree of knowledge, and then ultimately they are expelled. The snake itself is cursed, right? He brings death in the world. There's enmity between him and the human being. But this is the creation story, that it's vegetarian in an ideal world, but after death now we know things are all different. Question?
Yes, sir. Are the animals reproducing sexually before woman comes about?
Well, part of the challenge is we don't know the time frame. This could all be in like 36 hours that this is all happening, right? So it's probably not enough time for those kind of things to happen. This could have been happening over eon. Again, this is a myth, right? I remember hearing a story from Sherwin Wine that when he was a kid, he would ask questions of his father of these stories, and his father would say to him, these stories were not made for so many questions. So you don't necessarily want to ask too many questions about this. Okay, so here you get this creation story. You've got the beginnings of all kinds of things, why we wear clothes and why we feel like we're naked, and why there's death in the world and why we don't like snakes. But in the end, the snake is cursed with this crawling on the ground and eating dust, an enmity between the snake and people. So some animals we don't like, that's the premise, as opposed to all these animals just made for our benefit. And now Adam has to work the ground to earn from the sweat of his brow, but also we have this possibility that there's death in the world. Because what happens after they leave? The eternal God made garments of skins for Adam and his wife. So if there are skins, something got skinned, which means something died to help us. This is part of the use of animals for human beings. And of course, animals get used by human beings for all kinds of things. For physical labor, right? For produce, milk and meat, and for ritual purposes too. So let's look at the next major story, which is the story of Noah. Now, some people point to Noah as a great story about Jewish culture and animals, because he doesn't just save Noah, he saves all these animals. And kids get these Noah play sets with two little animals walking in the ark. Once in a while, though, you get a particularly sensitive kid who says, what about the third horse? Right? We're taking one male and one female. What about horse number 3? What about the colt that doesn't get on the ark? It's only one of each. Now, in chapter 6 of Genesis, it says take one pair of each animal. In chapter 7 of Genesis, it says take 7 pairs of the clean animals and 1 pair of the unclean animals. Now, lest you think that's necessarily better, what is the purpose of clean animals? Food or sacrifice, which you could call lunch for the god, but it's food or sacrifice. So the reason you have extras of the pure animals is for other purposes. Was there a question or comment in the back? Okay. So this is the Noah story, where it seems like they're saving animals for the sake of saving animals, but maybe not so much. Maybe not so much. Now, after the flood, we'll look at a little passage of that, Noah blesses God and his sons. And he says again, sounds familiar, Pru uravu, be fruitful and increase, multiply, fill the earth. Remember what used to fill the earth were the fish and the birds. Now, the human beings get to fill the earth. Notice what it says here, the fear and the dread of you will be upon the animals. They'll be afraid of you. That's why the wild animals run away. It's an etymology for that. And upon all the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea, they are given into your hands. You can do with them as you choose. You're in charge. Every creature that lives will be yours to eat. As with the green grasses I give you also. Now we have explicit permission to eat them. And notice it's every creature that lives is yours to eat, even the little piggies. At this stage. Later on, we'll have rules that define allowed animals and forbidden animals. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood still in it. There's an abhorrence of eating blood. That's why some of the kosher laws, you can't stun the animal. You have to have it at full vigor when you cut the throat, so as much blood as possible is drained out of it. In fact, you even salt the meat later. If you're baking and you break an egg, you're supposed to break the egg into a separate bowl. So in case there's a blood spot in the egg, you don't pollute the entire pot. You can't have blood, which is what makes the blood libel in medieval Europe so ridiculous. If they knew anything about Jewish dietary laws, to say that you took human blood to make matzah is the exact opposite of the dietary laws prohibiting eating of blood. And it's presented here as maybe an anti-cruelty measure. You don't eat the flesh with the lifeblood, or maybe it's a jealousy measure. Your own lifeblood I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every animal, of every humankind too. The blood belongs to God, not to people, because it's the blood of life. All right. And again, be fruitful then, and increase and abound on the earth and increase upon it. Now what's fascinating about that last verse, instead of milo, fill the aretz, it says shirtzu, which is the same word used for like a creepy crawly insect. Swarm. I want you to, or you're allowed to swarm over the earth. But of course, when a locust swarms, it's destructive. So I find that choice of vocabulary really, this is the etymology thing. It's fascinating that now when people are spreading over the earth, it's not just fill the earth, it's you're allowed to swarm the earth. And what have we done? That's indeed what we've done in our 8 billions all over the world. So here's the Noah story. Is it good for animals? Is it bad for animals? Well, we are allowed to be fruitful and multiply. The animals are also allowed to be fruitful and multiply, but that's not always good for the animals. In Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, he talks a little bit early on about whether domesticating animals has been good for the animals or not. There are certainly a lot more chickens in the world than there would be if they lived in the wild. But what's their quality of life? And what's their life prospect? Do they get to live to a ripe old age? Do they have a fun life while they're living? No. Well, some do, but most don't. So it's been good for their numbers. It's been terrible for their quality of life, their interaction with people. Now, of course, there are plenty of other texts in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the Torah, that detail how animals are allowed to be used, which animals are allowed for food, how you're supposed to slaughter them, in what context can you eat them or not, using animals as beasts of burden, and how do you know when an animal has been lost or not, and what do you do for an animal that's fallen? Do you help it up, even if it's your enemies? Do the animals get to rest on Shabbat? When the God demands the firstborn of the animals, or a tithe of the animals, how are those to be sacrificed, and by whom? One thing you don't find much of is a description of animals as pets. You don't really find that very much, because in much of the ancient world, animals were useful. I mean, the dogs were useful. Even the cats were useful, because the cats ate the mice that ate the grain. And that was good for people, to have the cats there to do that. So we don't have them as pets necessarily, but we have hints. For example, Joshua, who is Moses' number one, Joshua has a number one, so call it Moses' number two. And his name is Caleb in English. But Caleb in Hebrew is Kelev, dog. Now, if you named your son Dog, you might not call it a positive, uplifting name. But in a world where dogs are so vital and important, naming your kid Kelev it's a valued part of the family. And so there's an implication there that the dog was an important part of the society, just in the fact that somebody is named Dog in that narrative. Now we have that famous ruling about the milk and the meat. In modern Jewish practice, for Orthodox, conservative, and some even Reformed Jews, you're not supposed to eat milk and meat together. You have to wait a certain amount of time between eating one and the other. You have to have separate plates and so on. Now, in the Hebrew Bible itself, there's no clear statement of that. There's simply a line that says, you will not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Now, that's kind of vague, right? I mean, does that mean I can't have meat with the milk of the same animal? So I could have, sheep's milk with cow's meat, because it's not the mother, right? Even by implication. Is it very specific that this mother's milk can't be eaten with this particular calf that came directly from that cow? Or is it meant to be abstract and taken that way? Or is it simply a particularly cruel ritual that was being performed at the time? A kind of fertility rite, where you take the calf, which is a symbol of life, and you take the milk, which is sustaining the calf, and then you boil them together to kill the calf. I can imagine a kind of poetic, mystical ritual being constructed around that. Maybe that was what was being, we don't really know. But the rabbis themselves went in and dug into that story. In fact, there's a ritual of studying the Talmud called the Daf Yomi, the daily page of Talmud study. This week, they were debating what counts as meat. Does chicken count as meat for this prohibition? Because after all, there is no chicken milk, right? So can you eat chicken? Is chicken Parmesan allowed? Well, the rabbi, right, Parmesan is cheese, that'd be dairy. So could you eat chicken with a cream sauce? Well, some rabbis did. In fact, Rabbi Akiva said, fine. They don't make milk, so they don't count. And fish, even in modern Orthodox practice, fish doesn't count as meat. It's what's called parv. It's neutral. You can eat it with dairy or with meat separately. Can't eat it with lobster, but that's a different prohibition. So here we have this debate over what counts as meat and what doesn't for the purpose of this rabbinic law about separating milk and meat. My favorite take on this particular law is a poem by Yehuda Amichai, where he says, From thou shalt not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk, they made all the many rules of kashrut. But the milk is forgotten, and the mother is forgotten, and the kid is forgotten. From I love you, we've built our whole life together, but I've not forgotten you as you were then. So it's a contrast message, where the kosher laws are built as mountain hanging by a hair, but our life is built on a moment that I still remember. It's a nice adaptation of that law. Two more examples of rabbinic practice that are sometimes seen as positive, but maybe not. The first is in Deuteronomy chapter 22. It describes what to do with animals in certain circumstances. And again, maybe one positive, maybe one negative. If you see your fellow Israelites' ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your peer. So, lost animals should be brought home. That's probably good for the animals. It's certainly good for the owners. And if he doesn't live near you, or you do not know who the owner is, because after all, not every animal has a sign on it, you bring it home and it stays with you until someone claims it, and then you give it back. Do the same with their donkey. You do the same with their garment. You do the same with anything that belongs to them. So it's a property question as much as anything. If you see your fellow Israelites' donkey or ox fallen on the road, don't ignore it. Raise it together. Now again, that's a compassion for the animal. It's also a compassion for the owner. But there's something to be said for the compassion for the animal to help lift it up. Now, interestingly enough, in Yiddish you'd say mitten derinnen, in the middle of everything, a woman should not put on man's clothing or a man wear women's clothing. Just in case you forgot, I don't know why it's here in the middle of all these animals' rules, they throw in this one about not cross-dressing. This is, by the way, the justification used in some circles for prohibiting women from wearing a prayer shawl or putting on tefillin, the prayer boxes that Orthodox Jewish men wear, because those are defined as women's clothing or men's clothing. Of course, guess who defines it as women's clothing or men's clothing? What men and women wear. You know, that's conventional. It's like when people can't find clothes that fit them, certainly for the kids, in the girls section. Do you know what makes the jeans into girls' jeans? A girl wears them. And now they're girls' jeans. So wherever you buy them, wherever they fit, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But that's a definitional question. So now here's the other law I wanted to highlight. If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest, in any tree or on the ground, with fledglings, little chicks, or eggs, and the mother is sitting over the fledglings or on the eggs, well, let's say you want them. What do? This says, do not take the mother along with her young. Let the mother go, shoo the mother away, and take only the young, so you will fare well and have a long life. Now, that's good for the people, right? You shoo the mother away, ideally, she'll come back, lay more eggs, you get more eggs. Is it good for the animal? Well, the mother bird gets to live, but you're still taking either the babies or the eggs. You're like the snake, right? You're the predator that has come in and taken the young. And there's a claim here that if you do this, you will live a long life. It will be good for you. And this leads to one of my favorite stories in the Talmud. There's a rabbi who's famous or infamous as a rabbi who lost his faith. He's sometimes known as Acher, the other one, because they didn't want to use his real name. But his name was Elisha ben Avuya, Elisha, the son of Avuya. And the story goes that Elisha saw a man who, on Shabbat, climbed up a tree and grabbed the mother with the young and got away. And then another man waited until the end of Shabbat, climbed the tree, and shooed the mother away and took just the eggs. And on his way down the tree was bitten by a snake and he died. So here we have an explicit contradiction. The Torah says, if you follow this rule, you will live long and have a good life. And here in real life, someone broke the rule on Shabbat and lived, and someone followed the rule and died. And so he said, where is this man's long life? Where is the good for him? Now here the narrator of the Talmudic story jumps in and says, well, if only he'd known that that good long life is in the world to come. It's in the afterlife. If you want more on the afterlife, come to my program later in the month. But that's an explanation trying to resolve the contradiction of having obeyed the commandment and then still suffering. Well, is this saving the bird good for the bird, bad for the bird? It's good for the people, in theory. Now the last text to look at is this concept of tsar ba'alei chayim, the pain of animals, the pain of those who have life. We mentioned helping your neighbor's horse or ox or donkey back to its feet under a burden. You don't take the meat from the living animal. There's a claim that kosher slaughter is more humane because the animal dies faster. There are debates about this. And there's even some rules that say sometimes you have to care for the animal before yourself, that the animal gets fed before the people do, although people get to drink first. That's a little bit of both. In Proverbs chapter 12, it says, the righteous care for the needs of their animals. So there's a criteria of being righteous that you have to care for the animals. And then in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is a summary of Jewish law from the 19th century, we get a summary of these laws of caring for animals. The Torah forbids us to inflict suffering on any living creature. It's an obligation to remove the suffering of the creature, even ownerless, even if it belongs to a non-Jew. However, if the creatures are troublesome to mankind, or they are needed for medical purposes, or any other purpose, it is permitted to kill them, and we disregard their pain because we're allowed to slaughter them. So you're allowed to pluck feathers from a living geese if you need it for a quill, if you have no other feather with which to write, but many people avoid doing that because it's sort of cruel. If you wait for it to fall off, that's preferred. But you can kill them to eat them. Or if a spider finds its way in your house and you want to stomp it to death, you're allowed to do that. You don't have to save them. But in general, you want to avoid cruelty to the animals. When horses pull a wagon and come to a rough road or a steep hill and cannot draw it without help, it's a mitzvah to help the animals. Again, even if they belong to a non-Jew, you're not helping your Jewish neighbor, but you're helping the animals because of the suffering of them. And lest the other person strike them to force them to pull up more than they're able. So you want to stop the whipping, and you help the animals. It's forbidden to tie the legs of an animal, beast, or fowl in a manner that causes them pain. You can't set birds of eggs on a different species. That's cruelty to the animals. You're forbidden to castrate a person or an animal or a beast or a fowl. That's cruelty to the animals. It's also interfering with be fruitful and multiply. Right? So those are some of the laws of avoiding cruelty to animals. So what can we do for a New Year for animals? Well, some congregations bless the animals. They'll have people bring their pets to a service and they get a blessing by the rabbi or by the community. I would be sneezing up the wazoo. Sometimes people will even celebrate milestones. If a dog makes it to 13 years old, they'll celebrate something called a bark mitzvah. I wish I were joking. But if you look up bark mitzvah, you will find all these pictures of dogs in little taluses and little yarmulkes and like Torah-shaped treats, cookies. And it is as ridiculous as it sounds from my perspective. But we have to remember, of course, that for all these laws of avoiding cruelty to animals, there are plenty of reasons why Jewish life is not thinking of the good of the animals in its rulings. The original purpose of the New Year for animals was to tithe them for animal sacrifice. And we are allowed to use animals in labor, in food, in clothing, right? Leather, wool, those are animal products. We can use their skin to make a Torah scroll. The parchment that the Torah is made out of animal skin, of any kosher animal, actually. The leather for the straps on the tefillin comes from an animal. You may have heard the story, maybe 30 years ago now, of the agro-processor's kosher slaughter plant in Postville, Iowa, that was shut down for cruelty to the workers. It was not a non-kosher plant, even though the people were treated terribly. Because what made the food kosher or not was how the animals were killed, not how the people, the workers, were treated. And in the aftermath of the agriprocessor scandal, some conservative rabbis tried to initiate what they called hekcher tzedek, which is a righteous kind of kosher certification, that you couldn't have a kosher slaughtered animal if the people in the plant were not treated well. But many Orthodox rabbis refused to accept it, because they said it's not about the people. It's sad. It's about the animals. It's how the animals are killed. And they also didn't want to acknowledge conservative rabbis. That was also part of the rejection of it. There have been attempts, by the way, in some European countries to ban kosher slaughter and halal slaughter and Muslim slaughter. The claim is that it's cruel because you're not allowed to stun the animal. The challenge is, if you do that, you're saying, I don't want Jews here, or I don't want Muslims here, because I don't want them to be able to live by their dietary laws. And just imagine being a Jewish vegan. You couldn't use a Torah scroll, you couldn't put on the tefillin. What would your Seder plate look like? No shank bone? Right? Well, what some people do is they actually put a beet on the plate instead because it's red and it sort of evokes the shank bone. Or occasionally they'll put a sweet potato because then they can remember the Passover yam / lamb. This is part of the complications of modern values meeting ancient traditions. Experiencing outside cultural influences and our own personal experience and emotion. The fact that we don't talk about pets in Jewish life feels like something's missing. So I want to end with a sermon failure that some of you may have experienced some years ago. I did a series I called The Greatest Stories Never Told, where I inhabited certain characters from Jewish stories. I talked about the Diary of Anne Frank from Otto Frank's perspective. I talked about Tevye the milkman from his daughter's perspective. But the one sermon I gave that was a total flop was I tried to talk about goats. In particular, 3 goats that were very important in Jewish stories. The first goat was the goat from Chad Gad Ya, Chad Gad, the one little goat that we sing about at Passover. The second goat was the scapegoat, that is a sacrifice offered on Yom Kippur. It was a Yom Kippur sermon. And the third goat was the goat boiled in its mother's milk, that you weren't allowed to do. It was too many goats. People could not keep track of which goat was talking, and it didn't work. But as I think about it now, I could talk about 3 goats as 3 versions of the Jewish relationship to animals. There are the dietary laws, that's the goat in its mother's milk. There are the animal sacrifices and using them to atone for our sins vicariously. And just maybe, also the possibility of a pet, which is how we experience animals in suburbia. After all, my father bought me one little goat for 2 zuzim. But why? Was he buying the goat for a sacrifice? Or was this a goat for a pet? We don't know. But when we tell the story, we can tell it with our values in our setting. Well, thank you for your patience in exploring animals. I know I stand between you and the food, which is always a bad place to be. Again, I want to thank our Oneg host, the Science Fiction Book Club, and thank our musicians as well. It's great to have Miles back, and Ellen, always wonderful. Our closing song is on page 9 of your service booklet, or I'll share the screen as well. It is Hine Matov, Behold how good it is for brothers and sisters and our animals to dwell together.
שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. לה 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 לה, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. לה 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 לה, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Once again, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom, and please wish Shabbat Shalom to the people near you. And Shabbat Shalom to those online as well.